The royal palace of the Virex Empire was a place of constant movement. Servants hurried through the wide silver halls, guards stood at every entrance, and the sound of alien music often floated in the air. But this morning, something felt different. A strange tension seemed to hang over the place, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Paul, the newest human guard assigned to the palace, stood at his post outside the great royal chamber. His uniform was a mix of human military armor and Virex ceremonial design, with a long silver sash hanging across his chest. This was his first month in the Queen's service, and he had already learned one thing. Life in the palace was never simple. The Virex were proud, secretive, and deeply loyal to their monarch. A mistake here could mean the end of one's career, or worse. Inside the chamber, the alien queen, Shirella, was holding a diplomatic meeting with her council. She sat on her tall throne, its back shaped like a pair of silver wings. Her skin was pale gold, her eyes a deep shade of green that seemed to see through anyone who spoke to her. Around her, alien advisors stood in a half-circle, discussing trade agreements and border security with voices that rose and fell like waves. Paul could hear bits of the conversation through the open doors, though he didn't understand every Virex word. Most of it sounded routine. Trade routes, star system patrols, political promises. Nothing suggested trouble. Then it happened. A sharp gasp cut through the room. Paul's head turned instantly toward the sound. The voices inside stopped, replaced by the scraping of chairs and hurried footsteps. He stepped forward, peering through the doorway. The queen was no longer sitting upright. She was clutching her chest, her body trembling. Her eyes were wide, and her crown tilted as she leaned forward. "Your Majesty!" one of the advisors cried, rushing to her side. Within seconds, chaos erupted. Two Virex medics sprinted in from a side door, their long silver coats flapping behind them. Guards stepped back to give them space, while advisors began speaking over each other in panic. Paul's training kicked in. He moved closer, scanning the room for any sign of an attack. No. Weapons drawn, no suspicious movement, no signs of hostile intrusion. Yet something about the scene felt wrong. The medics laid the queen on a low-cushioned platform and began scanning her with handheld devices. Strange symbols flashed on the small screens, but from the medics' expressions, the readings made no sense. One of them shook his head and muttered something in Virex language, his voice tense. "What happened to her?" Paul asked the nearest guard, a tall Virex soldier named Ren. Ren's eyes narrowed, but he answered quickly. "We do not know. One moment she was speaking, the next she could not breathe. Her heart is unstable." Paul frowned. Unstable. How? Ren glanced toward the queen, then lowered his voice. "It is like nothing we have seen before. No wound, no poison detected, but her heart is failing." Paul had seen battlefield heart attacks before, soldiers collapsing under stress or injury, but this felt different. The queen had been calm, seated, surrounded by trusted people. There had been no visible threat. The advisors huddled together, whispering rapidly. A few glanced at Paul, and he could feel their unease. Humans were still newcomers in the Virex Empire's politics. Some saw Earth's alliance as a strength, others saw it as a weakness. Being the only human in the room made Paul stand out in ways he didn't always like. He kept scanning the chamber. Every detail mattered. Shadows near the pillars, the angle of the guards' positions, the shifting expressions of the advisors. He noticed that one or two of them weren't looking at the queen, but instead watching the medic's equipment with unusual interest, as if waiting for confirmation of something. Minutes stretched like hours. The medics worked quickly, placing thin patches on the queen's chest, injecting clear fluid into her arm and speaking into their comms. Still, her breathing was shallow, her skin dimming from gold to a pale yellow. Finally, one of the medics stood and addressed the council. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed confusion. There is no physical damage to her heart, no toxins in her blood, no signs of infection. Yet her heart rhythm is unstable. We cannot explain it. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Paul stepped back to his post, his mind turning over possibilities. He had been trained to think like a soldier, but also like an investigator. Something about this incident felt too sudden, too perfectly timed. In the middle of a political discussion, with all the most important figures present, this was no ordinary medical emergency. From the corner of his eye, he caught sight of a servant standing frozen near the wall. The servant's eyes darted between the Queen and the council, his hands trembling slightly. Then, as Paul looked directly at him, the servant turned and slipped quietly out of the side door. Paul filed that detail away. For now, the Queen's safety came first, but later he would need to find that servant and ask why he had looked so afraid. The head medic turned to the guards. "We are moving her to the healing chamber. She must be kept under watch at all times. No one except authorized personnel is to enter." Paul nodded, but his instincts told him that the real danger wasn't over. If this was an attack, whoever was behind it would not stop until their goal was complete. And if it wasn't an attack, then something even stranger was happening, something the Virex themselves might not understand. As the Queen was carried away, the royal chamber fell silent. The meeting was over, replaced by an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. Paul stood at the door, his eyes narrowing. Something had just changed in the heart of the Virex Empire, and he knew one thing for certain. He would not rest until he uncovered the truth. The Queen's transfer to the healing chamber was fast but tense. 4 guards carried the floating stretcher, its silver edges glowing faintly. Medics walked alongside, reading constant streams of data from their scanning devices. Paul followed, close behind, his eyes moving over every corner of the hall. The air felt heavy, almost charged. The healing chamber was unlike any room Paul had seen before. It was a tall, circular space filled with soft blue light. The walls were smooth and curved with no visible seams. In the center stood a large medical, pod shaped like a crystal shell. The pod opened silently, and the medics gently placed Queen Shirella inside. The crystal closed over her with a faint hiss, sealing her away from the rest of the room. Ren, the tall Virex guard Paul had spoken to earlier, stood beside him. "This chamber will keep her alive," Ren said in a low voice. "It can heal wounds, repair organs, and restore balance to the body. But if the cause is something the chamber cannot detect, then even this may not save her." Paul nodded, but his mind was still running through the details of what had happened. "You said before there was no wound, no poison. Could it be something else? Something that doesn't show up on your scans?" Ren's brow furrowed. "Possible, but I do not like the idea. It would mean someone has found a way to harm her beyond our science." The two stood in silence for a moment, watching the faint rise and fall of the Queen's chest inside the crystal shell. Around them, advisors whispered in small groups, their voices tense and suspicious. Paul noticed how the whispers stopped whenever his eyes met theirs. It didn't take a trained soldier to see the division in the room. Some of the advisors looked genuinely worried about the Queen's health. Others seemed more concerned with what her condition would mean for their own positions. Paul stepped away and quietly made his way toward the corridor outside. He had one thought. He needed to find that servant who had left the royal chamber so quickly earlier. The servant might know something, even if it was small. The palace halls were long and winding, lined with tall windows that showed the view of the alien city beyond. Silver towers stretched into the sky, and glowing lines of air traffic moved between them like streams of light. But Paul barely noticed the beauty outside. He was focused on scanning every face he passed, looking for that servant. He didn't have to search long. At the far end of a side passage, he saw the same thin figure from earlier, carrying a tray of empty cups. The servant froze when he spotted Paul approaching. "Wait," Paul called out, keeping his voice calm. "I just want to talk." The servant's hands tightened on the tray. "I cannot speak to you. I am only a worker." "You were in the royal chamber when the queen collapsed," Paul said. "You saw something. I saw your face. You looked afraid. Why?" The servant hesitated, eyes darting left and right. "It is not safe to talk here." "Then tell me where we can talk," Paul said quietly. The servant glanced over his shoulder, then nodded toward a narrow doorway. Inside was a small supply room stacked with cleaning tools and storage boxes. The servant closed the door behind them. "My name is Kell," he said softly. "I have served in the palace for 12 years. I know when something is wrong. Today, before the meeting began, I saw one of the advisors enter the Queen's private resting room. He had no reason to be there." Paul leaned forward. "Which advisor?" Kell's voice lowered even more. "His name is Drixel. He is the Queen's military advisor. He said he needed to check security equipment, but I have never seen him do that before. When he came out, he looked different. Focused, but too calm, as if he had already decided something." Paul stored the name in his mind. He had seen Drixel earlier in the council circle, a tall Virex with sharp features and a calm, almost cold expression. "Did you tell anyone about this?" Paul asked. Kell shook his head quickly. "If I speak against someone like him, I will be gone from the palace before the next sunrise. Or worse. I came to you because you are not one of them. You might listen." Paul studied him. The fear in Kell's voice was real. "Thank you for telling me. Stay quiet for now. If anyone asks, you spoke to me about supplies, nothing else." Kell nodded and slipped out of the room, leaving Paul alone in the dim light. Back in the healing chamber, the tension had only grown. The Queen's condition remained unchanged, her pulse weak, her breathing shallow. Advisors had started raising their voices at one another, arguing about who should take command of the Empire's affairs if she could not continue. Paul noticed Drixel standing apart from the rest, speaking quietly to 2 guards. His posture was calm, but his eyes kept drifting toward the healing pod as if measuring the time left. Wren approached Paul again. "The council will meet in private to discuss succession. It is tradition in times of uncertainty." Paul kept his tone neutral. "And if the Queen recovers?" Wren shrugged. "Then all will return to normal. But some may not wish for her to recover. Power changes hands quickly in such moments." Paul thought of Kell's words. If Drixel had entered the Queen's private chamber before the meeting, there might be something there, something the medics missed. "I want to check her resting room," Paul said. Wren gave him a long look. "That room is sealed until the Queen returns to it." "I just need a few minutes," Paul pressed. "If there's anything unusual, I might notice it. You know humans see things differently sometimes." Wren hesitated, then sighed. "Very. Well, I will give you 5 minutes. But if anyone asks, I did not know about it." The Queen's resting room was quiet and dim. The air smelled faintly of a sweet herbal scent, like dried flowers. The bed was made neatly, with soft gold sheets. Paul moved slowly, scanning every corner. He crouched to look under the bed and noticed something unusual, a faint shimmer on the floor, almost like tiny silver dust. He touched it with the tip of his finger. It felt dry but left a faint metallic trace on his skin. He carefully wiped the dust onto a piece of cloth from his pocket. His instincts told him this wasn't ordinary. If this was connected to the Queen's sudden collapse, it could be the first real clue. As he stood, he caught a faint reflection in the polished surface of a wall panel. Someone was standing in the doorway watching him. It was Drixel. "Finding something human?" Drixel asked in a calm voice. Paul kept his expression neutral. "Just making sure the room is secure." Drixel's gaze dropped to the cloth in Paul's hand. then returned to Paul's face. He smiled faintly, but it was not a warm smile. Be careful where you search. Curiosity can be dangerous in this palace. Without another word, Drixel turned and walked away, his steps slow and deliberate. Paul stood still for a moment, the cloth in his hand feeling heavier than before. He had no proof yet, but something told him that the truth was going to be far more dangerous than he expected. Night had fallen over the Virex Palace, though the alien city outside still glowed with endless streams of light. Paul stood on the upper balcony, his eyes moving across the skyline. The towers glittered, airships drifted silently between them, and a faint hum from the city's energy core vibrated in the distance. It looked peaceful, but inside the palace, tension was tightening like a rope. The Queen remained inside the healing pod. The medics said her condition was stable but unchanged. That meant they still had no idea what had caused the sudden attack on her heart. Advisors had spent hours in private meetings, their voices rising in muffled arguments. Paul could feel it. Power was shifting, and some people were waiting for her to fail. His shift tonight was to patrol the east corridor near the healing chamber. The corridor was wide and quiet, lined with tall windows on one side and smooth silver walls on the other. The air smelled faintly of metal and the palace's clean energy systems. As he walked, his boots making soft taps against the polished floor, he kept thinking about the metallic dust he had found in the Queen's resting room. The cloth with the dust was hidden inside his armor pouch. He needed to send it to someone he trusted, but until then, it was his only piece of physical evidence. Paul was passing a dim side hall when he heard a faint sound behind him. Not a footstep exactly, more like the rustle of cloth. He turned and saw a shadow move in the corner. A figure stepped forward slowly, looking around as if afraid to be seen. It was Kel, the servant who had spoken to him earlier. "Why are you here?" Paul asked quietly, stepping closer. Kel's eyes darted toward the windows, then toward the far end of the corridor. "I had to find you. It is not safe to talk in the day. Too many eyes, too many ears." Paul kept his voice low. "What is it?" Kel swallowed hard, his hands twisting together. "I overheard something tonight." Drixel met with 2 council members in the lower hall. They spoke in code, but I understood enough. They said the Queen will not wake unless they decide she should. Paul's eyes narrowed. Decide? How could they control that? Kel glanced over his shoulder again. "I do not know for certain, but I think it has to do with the dust you found. I saw Drixel carrying a small case into the Queen's room this morning. I believe that is when he planted it." Paul's mind began connecting the pieces. The dust could be some kind of advanced alien technology, small enough to escape normal scans, but deadly enough to stop the Queen's heart. If Drixel and his allies had the means to control it, they could decide exactly when she lived or died. "Why tell me this now?" Paul asked. Kel's voice trembled. "Because tonight I heard them speak of you. They know you are asking questions. They know you went into the Queen's resting room. If you are not careful, they will remove you before you can tell anyone." Paul's jaw tightened. "Remove me? How?" Kel shook his head. "You do not want to know. Please, be careful." Before Paul could ask more, the faint hum of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Kel stiffened, then backed away into the shadows. "Wait!" Paul started, but the servant was gone, slipping down the side hall and disappearing into darkness. Like footsteps grew louder and Wren appeared from the far end of the corridor. "Paul, the council is ending their meeting. Stay sharp tonight. Some are saying the Queen may not see the sunrise." Paul kept his tone neutral. "We will see about that." Wren gave him a long look, but didn't press for details. Hours passed. The palace was quieter now, the sounds of the day fading into the stillness of night. Paul stayed near the healing chamber, his mind replaying Kell's words. He knew he couldn't accuse Drixel without proof. He needed something undeniable, something that would survive even if the Virex tried to hide it. That meant one thing: he needed to get the dust sample analyzed by human scientists. The Virex labs were too close to Drixel's control. Just before midnight, Paul made his move. He slipped into a small communications room on the east side of the palace. The room was empty, lit only by the soft blue glow of a holo terminal. He placed the cloth with the dust into a sealed analysis capsule and connected it to the human diplomatic channel. The machine's voice was soft and mechanical. Destination: Earth Central Medical Research. Priority: urgent. Send, Paul said. The capsule slid into the transmitter slot, and with a low hum, it vanished into the long-range relay system. Somewhere, light years away, human scientists would soon have it in their hands. Paul allowed himself a moment of relief, but it didn't last. As he turned to leave, he noticed the door was no longer fully closed. A shadow shifted outside. He moved toward it quickly, pulling the door open. The hallway was empty, but the faint sound of retreating footsteps echoed away into the distance. Someone had been watching. Paul knew then that Kell had been right. His movements were no longer private. Every step he took from now on would be seen, maybe even reported directly to Drixel. When he returned to the healing chamber, Drixel himself was standing by the crystal pod. He looked at Paul with a calm, almost polite expression. "Long night, human." "Just doing my rounds," Paul replied. Drixel's gaze lingered for a moment before he turned back to the Queen. "I hope you enjoy your time here. Life in the palace can change quickly." Paul stayed silent, watching him until he walked away. He had no doubt now. This was more than a political struggle. The Queen's life was hanging by a thread, and someone was holding the scissors. As Paul resumed his post, the city lights outside seemed to flicker faintly, as if warning him that time was running out. The next morning came with a dull silver light filtering through the palace windows. Paul had barely slept. His thoughts had circled all night around Kell's warning, Drixel's quiet threats, and the dust sample now racing toward Earth. He knew that if the human lab could confirm what he suspected, it would be the breakthrough he needed. But until then, he had to stay one step ahead of whoever was watching him. The palace was busy again. Servants moved through the halls carrying trays and messages, guards stood at their posts, and advisors walked in pairs, speaking in hushed voices. Despite the usual movement, there was a heavy, unspoken tension in the air. The Queen was still in the healing pod, her condition unchanged. Everyone knew the longer she stayed like this, the more power shifted toward those who wished to replace her. Paul began his patrol for the day, but instead of walking the usual routes, he decided to explore areas near the Queen's personal quarters. He had one goal: find more traces of whatever had caused her collapse. The resting room where he had first found the metallic dust was still sealed. No one had entered since yesterday, but Paul knew that if Drixel or his allies wanted to remove evidence, they could do it without leaving a trace. He moved to a smaller chamber connected to the resting room, a storage area where the Queen's personal belongings and ceremonial items were kept. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of the same herbal scent he had noticed before. The shelves held decorative boxes, tall vases, and folded banners marked with the royal crest. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but Paul had learned to look closer. He ran his fingers along the shelves and under the table edges. In the far corner, behind a tall vase, he spotted something, a small silver disc no bigger than a coin. It was smooth, with a faint pattern etched into its surface. When he lifted it, it was surprisingly light, almost weightless. It didn't look like anything from human technology, but it also didn't match the decorative style of the Virex palace. Paul suspected it was part of a device, maybe even related to the dust. He wrapped it in another piece of cloth and slipped it into his armor pouch. He stepped out of the storage room and nearly collided with Wren. "You're far from your usual." "Post," Wren said, his tone more curious than accusing. "Checking the security around the Queen's quarters," Paul replied smoothly. "If someone wanted to harm her, they might have left signs in nearby rooms." Wren's eyes softened slightly. "I respect that you are trying, but be careful. The Council is watching everything. If they think you are stepping beyond your orders, they may see you as a threat." Paul nodded. "I understand." But in truth, he had no intention of stopping. Later in the day, while passing one of the communication points, Paul's wrist device vibrated. It was a secure message from the Earth research team. The message was short but direct. "Sample contains microscopic machines. Programmed to target Virex heart tissue. Extremely advanced. More analysis to follow." Paul read it twice, his stomach tightening. His suspicion was now confirmed. This was no accident or natural illness. It was an attack using technology far more precise than any conventional weapon. Whoever had done this had access to resources and knowledge that few in the galaxy possessed. That evening, Paul attended the security briefing for the night watch. Drixel was there, standing at the front of the room, speaking with his usual calm authority. He talked about guarding the palace gates, watching the city air routes, and keeping an eye on human visitors. But Paul noticed something. Drixel never once mentioned the Queen's condition or the investigation into her collapse. It was as if her situation was no longer important to him. When the meeting ended, Paul left quickly, heading toward the lower sections of the palace. Kell had told him that Drixel often met his allies there, away from the main halls. If he could overhear one of these meetings, he might learn more. The lower halls were older and less polished. The walls were darker, and the air was cooler, with a faint hum from the palace's energy systems. Paul moved quietly, listening for voices. After several minutes, he heard them, two deep voices speaking in Virex language. He crept closer, staying in the shadows. Through a narrow doorway, he saw Drixel speaking with another council member. They stood near a large table, a small case resting on top. Paul couldn't hear every word, but he caught enough to understand the tone. Drixel was giving instructions, his voice calm but firm. The other council member nodded, lifting the case as if it contained something valuable or dangerous. Paul leaned in slightly, but the floor under his boot creaked. The voices stopped. "Who's there?" Drixel's voice was sharp now. Paul stepped back, melting into the shadows of the hall. He moved quickly, turning down another passage before they could reach the door. His heart pounded, but he kept his pace steady until he was safely away. Back near the healing chamber, he found Wren again. "You look like you've been running," Wren observed. Paul took a breath. "I think I know how the Queen was attacked. But I don't have enough to prove it yet." Wren studied him for a long moment. "If you are right, then you are walking on dangerous ground. Be certain before you act. The wrong move could cost you more than your position here." Paul nodded, but inside, he knew he couldn't wait much longer. The Queen's condition wasn't improving, and if Drixel had control over the technology inside her body, her life could end the moment he decided. That night, as Paul stood his post outside the healing chamber, he made himself a promise. He would find solid proof, something no one could deny. And when he did, he would make sure it reached the one person who could act on it. The Queen herself, if she lived long enough to hear it. Outside, the alien city glowed under the pale light of 2 moons. Inside, the palace felt colder than ever. Paul's eyes stayed sharp, knowing the shadows around him were not empty. The medical wing of the Zorath Palace was quieter than usual. The alien queen still rested in her private chamber, guarded by 2 tall insectoid warriors. She was recovering, but her breathing was slow, and her skin had lost some of its color. Everyone in the palace now knew about the attack on her life. The only question that remained was, who was bold enough to try it? Daniel walked through the corridor with a firm step. His mind was racing, but his face showed calm determination. He had been given permission by the Queen herself to investigate without restrictions. For a human guard in an alien empire, this was not just an honor, it was a dangerous responsibility. He had been piecing together small details for days. The cup from which the Queen drank before her collapse had contained microscopic traces of an organic toxin, one that dissolved quickly after entering the bloodstream. The palace kitchen staff was checked, but all passed the loyalty tests. That meant the poison had been placed after the drink was already served. Daniel remembered a small detail from that day. A silver tray had been carried by a servant drone, but someone had walked close behind it. The palace security logs showed blurred images, an odd thing since the Zorath security systems were known to be flawless. Someone had tampered with the recording. Daniel's instincts told him that whoever had done this was still inside the palace, and he was going to draw them out. That night, Daniel requested an audience with the Queen. She was still weak, but she allowed him in. Her compound eyes watched him closely as he explained his plan. "I will announce," Daniel said, "that you have recovered completely and will hold a public address in the main hall tomorrow. The one who tried to harm you will believe they failed and may try again. I will be ready for them." The Queen tilted her head. "Human guard, you risk much. If they know you are hunting them, they may target you instead." Daniel gave a faint smile. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." The Queen studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "Do it, but take care. The enemy may be closer than you think." The next day, the announcement spread quickly through the palace. Servants, guards, and council members all prepared for the event. The grand hall was decorated with banners, and guards were stationed in every corner. Daniel, dressed in the dark ceremonial armor of a palace protector, moved among them quietly, noting every face and movement. He had planted a hidden sensor in the Queen's new goblet, a device that could detect even the smallest chemical change in the drink. If anyone tried to poison her again, it would send an alert to Daniel's wrist communicator. Hours passed, and the hall began to fill. The Queen entered slowly, still appearing weak, but with a determined expression. Her guards formed a protective circle around her as she reached the central platform. Daniel stayed in the shadows near the side of the stage, his eyes scanning the crowd. The Queen began her speech, thanking her people for their loyalty and promising strength for the Empire. Daniel's communicator remained silent. No poison had been placed in her drink yet. He felt a strange tension in the air, as if someone was waiting for the perfect moment. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Daniel saw a small glint of light. It came from one of the council members standing near the front, a Zorath noble named Virek. Daniel had met him once before. He was clever, polite, and always kept his distance from the Queen. But now he was holding something in his claw, half hidden under his robe. It was a thin, needle-like tube. Daniel's heart raced. This was no kitchen servant. It was a high-ranking official. Virek was not trying to poison the Queen this time. He was going to inject her with something right there on the stage. Daniel moved quickly, weaving through the guards and stepping up behind Virek just as he raised his claw. In one swift motion, Daniel grabbed the noble's arm and twisted it, forcing the weapon to drop to the floor. Gasps filled the hall. The Queen stopped speaking, her eyes locking on the scene before her. "This is your traitor," Daniel said, holding Virek firmly. He was about to finish what he started. Virek struggled, his mandibles clicking angrily. "You know nothing, human. You do not understand what is at stake." Daniel tightened his grip. "Then explain it, because from where I stand, it looks like you tried to murder your own queen." The guards rushed in and restrained Virek, but the room was filled with uneasy whispers. The Queen slowly stepped down from the platform and approached them. Her voice was calm but cold. "Virek, I trusted you as an advisor for many cycles. You will speak your reasons. Now. Virek's eyes shifted nervously. Your rule has weakened the Empire. We are surrounded by enemies, and you waste time speaking of peace. I acted for the survival of our people. Daniel felt the tension in the hall grow heavier. This was no ordinary crime. It was a political move. The Queen's tone sharpened. Peace does not weaken us. Betrayal does. Take him to the interrogation chamber. I will hear the rest of his confession in private. As the guards dragged Virek away, Daniel felt a mix of relief and unease. He had caught the traitor, but his words hinted at a deeper problem in the Empire. And he had a feeling this was not over. That night, as Daniel walked back to his quarters, he noticed a faint shadow following him in the corridor. When he turned, no one was there, but deep inside, he knew someone else was still watching. Someone who had not yet made their move. This was only the first layer of the truth, and the real danger was still hiding in the dark corners of the Zorath Palace. The palace had grown colder. The walls that once echoed with laughter and music now held only whispers and shadows. Queen Shirella remained in her healing chamber, slowly recovering, but still far from strong. The arrest of Virek had sent shock waves through the council, but the true danger was still unknown to many. Daniel moved quietly through the palace halls, his senses alert. The attack had become more than just a threat to the Queen's life. It was a test of loyalty and courage. He knew someone else was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The day had been long, filled with briefings, security, checks, and tense conversations. Yet Daniel could not shake the feeling that the real enemy was hiding in plain sight, blending into the palace like a ghost. Late that night, Daniel returned to the healing chamber. The Queen was awake, her eyes soft but filled with strength. She looked at him and nodded, silently showing her gratitude. "Daniel," she said softly, "the council is broken. Some want peace, some want war, and some want me gone. What can I do to stop this?" Daniel looked down, thinking carefully. "You are the heart of this empire, Your Majesty. If they can hurt you, they can control everything. We need to find the real mastermind behind this attack." The Queen's gaze hardened. "Then we must act before it is too late." As if on cue, a sudden alarm broke the silence. Red lights flashed, and an urgent voice called over the palace loudspeakers. "Intruder detected near the eastern wing. All guards to positions." Daniel grabbed his weapon and raced toward the eastern wing with a group of guards. The corridors were dark and twisting. Every step was heavy with tension. They reached a side hall where motion sensors had picked up movement. Daniel's heart pounded as he scanned the area. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the far end of the hall. Daniel called out, "Stop! Palace guard!" But the figure did not slow. Instead, it moved with unnatural speed, disappearing into a narrow side passage. Daniel and the guards gave chase, following the intruder through a maze of corridors. The chase was silent except for the soft footfalls echoing off the stone walls. At last, they cornered the intruder near the servants' quarters. Daniel stepped forward, weapon raised. "Identify yourself," he commanded. The figure turned slowly, revealing the face of an alien masked in a sleek black suit. Its eyes glowed faintly beneath the hood. "I am here to finish what was started," the intruder said, voice cold and steady. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Who sent you?" "What do you want with the Queen?" The intruder laughed softly. "You think this is about me?" "No, I am just the blade. The hand that guides me is far more powerful." Without warning, the intruder lunged at Daniel. He barely dodged the swift strike, countering with a strong blow. The fight was quick and deadly. The intruder moved with strange skill, blending speed and strength. Daniel managed to wrestle the attacker to the ground and hold him still. The guards closed in and secured the prisoner. Back in the healing chamber, Daniel demanded answers. The masked intruder was unmasked, revealing a pale face with sharp features and cold eyes. "I serve the true rulers of this empire," the prisoner said. "Those who believe the Queen's peace will bring ruin. We act for the survival of our people." Daniel's mind raced. The conspiracy was bigger than he imagined. There were factions within the empire willing to kill their own queen for power. The queen listened quietly. Then she spoke with quiet authority. "This ends now. No more shadows. We will find the traitors and justice will be served." Daniel felt a new hope. With the intruder captured, the palace might find peace again. But deep inside, he knew the real battle had just begun. The palace was filled with a tense silence. After capturing the masked intruder, the Queen and Daniel prepared for the final step. It was time to uncover the truth behind the attack and stop those who wished to destroy the empire from within. In the great council chamber, the remaining advisors gathered. Some looked nervous, others angry, and a few were calm but watchful. Daniel stood beside the Queen, ready to face whatever came next. The Queen's voice rang clear. "The time for secrets is over. We know there is a group among us who seek to harm the empire. Now they will be revealed." She turned to the intruder, who was held by 2 guards. "Speak your truth." The prisoner looked around, then began. "There are those who believe the Queen's way of peace will bring weakness. They want to take control before the empire falls apart. I was sent to stop her recovery to ensure she never returned." Daniel listened carefully. Who are these people? Who leads them? The intruder's eyes flashed. "You will find the answer among the council. One of them is the true mastermind." The chamber filled with shocked gasps. The Queen raised her hand and silence fell again. "We will find the traitor," she said. "But it cannot be done by suspicion alone. We need proof." Daniel stepped forward. "I have gathered evidence." He showed the small silver disc and the microscopic machines that had attacked the Queen's heart. "These are tools used to harm her. The source is close to us." One of the advisors, a quiet older Virex named Soren, frowned. "This is grave, but how do we find the one who used these?" Daniel nodded. "That is why I requested a full palace scan. Every room, every device, every communication will be checked for traces." The Queen smiled faintly. "Justice will be swift." For the next hours, the palace was a hive of activity. Machines whirred, messages were scanned, and guards moved through every corridor. Slowly, the evidence began to come together. At last, the palace computer flagged a hidden transmission. It came from the chamber of a council member named Dralin. The message was coded but matched the patterns of the devices used in the attack. Daniel and the Queen moved quickly to Dralin's quarters. When they arrived, they found him trying to erase data from his personal terminal. "Dralin," the Queen said firmly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy and attempted murder." He turned pale but sneered. "You think you can stop the Empire's future? The Queen's peace is a lie. We will rebuild it with strength." Daniel stepped forward. "Your plan has failed," the Queen spoke with authority. "You will answer for your crimes." Dralin was taken away, and the palace returned to calm. The Queen's health improved steadily, and the threat of internal betrayal lessened. In the days that followed, Daniel was honored for his courage and loyalty. The alliance between humans and the Virex grew stronger, built on trust and respect. One evening, Daniel stood on the balcony, watching the twin moons rise over the city. The palace glowed softly, a beacon of hope in the vast universe. The Queen joined him. "Thank you, Daniel. You saved my life and our empire." He smiled. I only did what was right. She looked out at the stars. There will always be challenges ahead, but together, we are stronger. Daniel nodded. Together, we will face whatever comes. As the night deepened, the city beneath them shimmered with promise. A new dawn was beginning, not just for the Queen, but for all who called the Empire home.